Here's the story. The publication, The Voice of San Diego, recently released a database of San Diego area school data showing comparative results for San Diego schools on something called the California Healthy Kids Survey. And it shows huge disparities throughout the district on all kinds of measures impacting student learning. Now, for all of our viewers outside of the state of California, the California Healthy Kids Survey is given throughout the state, and it's one measure that's used in the accountability system under state guidelines. It is administered to kids in grades 5, 7, 9, and 11, so sort of the end of elementary school through most of high school, and measures things like school safety, measures how engaged students are in their learning, relationships they have with adults, supports on campus, and then for older students, even things like substance abuse prevalence or suicidal ideation among peers. It's generally a culture and climate of the school type of survey. So in the city of San Diego, in San Diego Unified School District, we had these huge disparities. Wealthier and nicer schools with almost all the kids saying it's safe. Right. Poorer, more heavily minority schools, half of the kids saying it's safe, type of a thing, right? So big disparities, maybe mirroring the same type of disparities we see with test scores and graduation rates and that sort of thing. So, Manuel, what do you think here?
Yeah, so I'm not surprised by the disparities, really at all. And San Diego, for those who aren't familiar, that district spans a wide area that includes really wealthy, affluent neighborhoods and really struggling neighborhoods and marginalized populations. So to see these disparities, not too big of a surprise. We've heard stories in the past about discipline disparities within San Diego schools with regards to the impact that harsh discipline has had on Black students and foster youth, and the lack of suspensions and expulsions in more affluent schools. So this is in line with that, I think, in terms of these disparities. It is a reminder, of course, that when we're talking about educating our youth and we're talking about how students are doing, how schools are doing, it's about so much more, obviously, than test scores, but asking the students how they feel about their surroundings is kind of like a basic step that I feel like a lot of times we forget about in education. And to have 99% of students at what school was that? Ocean Beach Elementary report that they have an adult who cares about them. 99%, that's 99% on any scale is like, wow. But in this case, almost every student there feels that there's an adult that cares about them, where it's less than half at another elementary school. Think about being an elementary school student who feels that no adult at the elementary school cares for you. That's the foundation right there. If you're learning in first, second, third grade that nobody cares about you, then what does your educational outlook look like? It's not surprising. It's sad, but
yeah, I agree with you from that standpoint, and I both want to make sure we give the fuller context of this, so it's not to suggest that what we're doing is just throwing San Diego Unified under the bus. Because the reality is that we could list off probably every significantly large district in the state of California has the same type of disparities going on, right? So this just happens to be a story out of San Diego. It's a huge district, so it is obviously really significant in terms of sample size. That said, you could probably walk down, the street here and find similar disparities in data. So I want to be clear about that. But I will say what I find kind of fascinating about this, even though this data is alarming and is a big call to action, is in the landscape of things we use for school accountability in this country. Always we're talking about test scores. We're talking about graduation rates, college applications, college acceptances, who actually winds up going to college and then who winds up staying in college, AP exams, all that stuff, right? And those are important metrics. From my standpoint, I'm not challenging them, but it does raise a question about resources and use of resources in our field. And I have long joked in my career that half of what all of the fancy accountability systems tell us, you could just pay a couple of teenagers to walk around the community with a clipboard and just ask people, is that a good school? Is that not a good school? Is that an okay school? Is it a pretty good school? And probably get data that matches what all these complex psychometrically, sound data sources tell us, right? So I think it's an interesting kind of counterbalance to the quantitative data because it's coming from kids and their
Yeah.
perspective on their own education. And also, even though this survey is not free, it's certainly a lot cheaper than a lot of the tests that we administer. So I do wonder also about the applicability of simple surveys as like equally valid measures of school accountability. They're actually a lot cheaper and less intrusive on the classroom than testing is in some cases.
That brings a good point. Actually, I was thinking about years where I have had students of a grade level that take the Healthy Kids survey. There have been years where it's been administered or delivered to us as teachers in a very careful way, as to like make sure we set aside time in our class period and explain it to students and explain what happens with this data and all that. And other times where it's just kind of like an email item and make sure you get this done during homeroom or whatever. So part of me wonders, especially for the higher achieving schools where data means so much and their reputation means so much perhaps to them and to the folks around there, I wonder if there's extra emphasis for the students to respond in a certain way, not to like totally, skew the results, but to make sure students realize how important the survey is and think about this and think about that and walking students through versus a school where maybe there's long-term subs everywhere and there's so many other things going on that it's like, oh, okay, we got to give out the survey real quick. I do wonder, since it is a simple survey, really simple, with a sense of, students pull it up and just, check through and click on through. I wonder if that has any role to play in terms of the results. Just curious.
It's an interesting question. I'm not sure I have the answer to it, but I will say
I need the answer. I need the answer.
The data cited in the article from Voice of San Diego only considered schools for which there was an over 50% response rate.
Okay.
Right? And lots of the schools that they actually cited had like over 80% response rates, right?
Yeah.
So these are pretty, very, very large sample sizes in terms of student responses. So, that is an interesting question and maybe some PhD student out there can explore for us. Yeah. But I still think it stands that this is a really interesting data source that captures actually what kids think about their school. And I would be really curious to see, like, stack that up against test scores, attendance, all these other things. And I'd be willing to bet the house that we're going to see very close correlation between what schools are identified as good schools by those measures and good schools by this measure.
Yeah, and that will likely also correlate with average household income in those areas as well.
You don't say.
Yeah, quite sure it's all connected, Jeff.
Yeah.